In the last 24 hours, something has shifted, and not in a small way. The United States is now 5 days into an active shooting war with Iran. Gas prices have posted their biggest one-day spike since Hurricane Katrina. The Senate just voted to keep that war going. Congress is subpoenaing the Attorney General over secret files. China is signaling lower economic growth targets. And the entire post-World War II alliance with Europe is being rewritten in real time. 5 fronts, 5 shockwaves, and every single one of them is hitting the American economy, your grocery bill, your gas tank, your retirement account right now. Pause. Stay with me for the next few minutes, because what is happening today in Washington, Tehran, Moscow, Beijing, and Brussels is not background noise. It is the story of where American power and American money are headed, and you need to understand it. Let us begin at home. In Washington, the political environment this week has been nothing short of extraordinary. The Senate voted 47 to 53 on Wednesday to reject a war powers resolution that would have forced President Trump to halt further military strikes against Iran. The measure, pushed by Senate Democrats, was defeated. 5 days after the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes on Iran, Congress has effectively given the Trump administration a green light to continue, at least for now. The political and economic implications of that vote are enormous, and we will return to them. But first, let us look at what else is happening inside the country. The House Oversight Committee voted on Tuesday to subpoena Attorney General Pam Bondi, ordering her to testify about her handling of documents related to Jeffrey Epstein. 5 Republican members crossed party lines and joined all Democrats in support of the subpoena. According to Just Security, the motion passed with bipartisan backing, an unusual moment of cross-aisle rebellion that underscores mounting frustration within the Republican caucus itself. Meanwhile, according to an internal document reviewed by the Washington Post, Immigration and Customs Enforcement is drafting a letter to terminate its $1.2 billion contract for Camp East, Montana, a massive detention facility near the southern border that opened less than 8 months ago. A spokesperson for the Department of Homeland Security confirmed the review but stated that no final decisions had been made. The story signals potential upheaval in the administration's immigration infrastructure at a time when the broader policy debate remains fierce. But the domestic story with the most direct economic bite is one that connects back to the war in the Middle East. Gas prices at American pumps jumped 11 cents in a single day on Monday, the biggest overnight spike since March of 2022, according to GasBuddy analyst Patrick DeHaan. By Tuesday, the national average hit $3.11 per gallon. According to CBS News, Americans now pay an average of $3.25, up 26 cents since last week, the highest level since April of 2025. This matters enormously for the political calculus inside Washington. President Trump spent months celebrating declining gas prices as one of his administration's central economic achievements. In his State of the Union address, he claimed prices were below $2.30 per gallon in most states, a figure his critics noted was more optimistic than official AAA data. Now, with the war in Iran threatening to push prices even higher, those claims have become politically costly. Republican strategist Mark Bednar told NBC News that Trump understands the political value of affordable gas and will likely try to adjust. But Democratic critics, including Representative Ro Khanna of California, were not waiting. Writing in an op-ed published Tuesday, Khanna said Americans did not want higher gas prices, did not want more dead American soldiers, and did not want to spend tens of billions of dollars on what he called a, and I quote, stupid conflict. That's his direct quote, and his framing, not ours. The Federal Reserve is watching closely. Economists warn that if oil prices push inflation back above the Fed's 2% target, the central bank could be forced to keep interest rates elevated for longer, directly undercutting Trump's goal of lowering mortgage rates and stimulating the housing market. Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Analytics, explained that every sustained 1-cent increase in gasoline costs American consumers roughly $1.4 billion per year. He added that higher gas prices are particularly damaging to lower-income households, saying, and this is a summary of his analysis, that this is the group already under severe financial pressure, and energy price shocks hurt them first and hardest. On February 28th, the United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes on Iran. Today is day 5 of that conflict, and the situation is rapidly expanding. According to the Iranian Health Ministry, a figure that has not been independently verified by Western outlets, 920 people in Iran have been killed and thousands more injured. The Institute for National Security Studies in Israel, a private research body, reported that the United States and Israel have conducted at least 11 waves of strikes against roughly 600 targets inside Iran. Iran's response has been sweeping and has extended well beyond its borders. According to CBS News live coverage on March 5th, the United Arab Emirates reported that its air defenses intercepted 6 of 7 incoming Iranian ballistic missiles on Thursday, with one striking UAE territory. 125 of 131 drones fired at the UAE were also intercepted. In Kuwait, military forces reported a fresh wave of missiles and drones entering the country's airspace on Thursday morning. Iranian drones struck Nakhchivan, an autonomous territory of Azerbaijan, according to the Azerbaijani Foreign Ministry, which summoned Iran's ambassador and reserved the right to retaliation. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps announced on March 5th that the Strait of Hormuz is now closed to ships from the United States, Israel, Europe, and other Western allies. The Strait of Hormuz is the world's most critical oil choke point. 1/5 of global oil and gas passes through it daily. Claudio Galimberti, chief economist at Rystad Energy, described the current halt of tanker traffic through the strait as unprecedented, comparing it to blocking the aorta of the global oil system. According to NPR's reporting, oil markets have never before seen a complete shutdown of Hormuz traffic of this scale. The economic shockwaves are already visible. Brent crude, the global benchmark, briefly exceeded $80 per barrel on Monday before settling. Analysts at Tom Close's Gulf Oil forecast the national average gasoline price in the United States reaching $3.50 per gallon in the coming weeks. Energy economist Amy Myers Jaffe at New York University warned that the full impact on consumer prices will be felt in roughly 6 weeks, the time it takes crude oil to be refined and reach pump stations. Diesel, jet fuel, and heating oil prices are all rising in parallel, which means shipping costs, airline ticket prices, and household heating bills are next in line. From a strategic standpoint, the Trump administration is defending the war on 2 grounds. First, officials initially cited Iran's alleged plans to develop nuclear weapons. However, the United Nations nuclear watchdog told CNN directly that Iran was not days or weeks away from building a nuclear bomb. Trump himself has previously stated that Iran's nuclear program was, in his words, obliterated by U.S. strikes last summer. Second, Israeli President Isaac Herzog told CBS News that the United States and Israel had no, and I quote his words, much of a choice, but to act, citing concerns about Iran's weapons expansion and what he described as a new secret plan to rush toward a nuclear device. Critics in Congress, particularly Democrats, say neither justification holds up under scrutiny. The economic and political stakes for the United States are high. Oxford economics analysts wrote in their initial assessment that Iran cannot win militarily, but that disrupting Gulf oil flows could inflict material economic damage and market volatility on the United States and global markets. Stagflation, the combination of higher prices and slower growth, is now a serious concern among economists. Ipek Ozkardskaya, senior analyst at Swissquote, told CNBC that given current growth recovery trajectories, stagflation risks may reemerge depending on how long Middle Eastern tensions continue. The U.S. Russia relationship in early 2026 is one of the most unusual geopolitical constructions in decades. On one hand, the Trump administration has been actively pursuing warmer ties with Moscow. On the other, the Iran war has created a new and serious friction point between the two countries. Begin with the structural shift. Since Trump's return to the White House in January 2025, the administration has moved aggressively to normalize relations with Russia. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth ordered the suspension of offensive cyber operations against Russia. In February of 2026, the United States and Russia formally agreed to resume high-level military-to-military dialogue, the first such contact in more than 4 years, suspended before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. According to PBS NewsHour, the restored communication channel is designed to in the words of the official statement, provide consistent military contact as both parties work toward a lasting peace. Many of Trump's peace proposals for Ukraine have heavily favored Russian positions, including requiring Kyiv to cede occupied territory. Also significant, the New START nuclear arms control treaty, the last legally binding framework limiting deployed strategic warheads between Washington and Moscow, expired on February 5th of this year. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, this marks the end of an era of arms control and removes verifiable limits on both countries' deployed intercontinental nuclear forces. CFR arms control expert Aaron Dumbacher wrote that this does not preclude future negotiations, but the absence of any treaty framework is a historic gap that increases strategic uncertainty for both nations and the world. Now add the Iran war. Russia and Iran had built what the Kremlin described as a comprehensive strategic partnership. Putin released a statement condemning the killing of Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei, who died during U.S.-Israeli strikes, calling it and this is attributed to Putin's official statement, cynical violation of all norms of human morality and international law. Russian-Iranian analyst Nikita Smagin told the Moscow Times that Putin takes the attack personally, comparing it to the killings of other Russian allies, such as Libya's Muammar Gaddafi and Iraq's Saddam Hussein. More concretely, Russia stands to lose a $25 billion deal to build 4 nuclear reactors in southern Iran, a multi-billion-dollar planned railway corridor between Russia and Iran, and an expanding footprint in Iran's oil and gas industry. Yet Russia's short-term economic interests cut in the other direction. The de facto closure of the Strait of Hormuz has sent global oil prices higher, and Russia is one of the world's largest oil exporters at 9.3 million barrels per day. Higher prices, even temporarily, boost Russian government revenues at a moment when Western sanctions continue to pressure the Russian economy. Analysts at the Moscow Times noted that statements of condemnation are likely to be the extent of Russia's short-term response, given that Moscow currently lacks the ability or willingness to directly challenge the United States militarily over Iran. The long-term picture, however, including whether a post-war Iranian government will maintain close ties with Russia, remains deeply uncertain. In Beijing, today is the opening of the National People's Congress, China's annual legislative session, and the headline number from that gathering tells a significant economic story. China has officially set its GDP growth target for 2026 at approximately 5%, the lowest target the country has set in decades. According to NPR's coverage of the NPC session, this reflects a cautious posture driven by a property sector slump, structural headwinds at home, and growing uncertainty abroad, including the ongoing trade friction with Washington and the disruption that the Iran war is introducing into global energy and supply chains. The U.S.-China trade relationship, meanwhile, is operating under an unusual and fragile truce. To briefly recap what led here, in April 2025, Trump imposed tariffs as high as 145% on Chinese imports. China retaliated. After months of escalation, a series of truces were negotiated, including a landmark agreement following a Xi-Trump summit in South Korea in October 2025. Under the current arrangement, most reciprocal tariffs have been suspended through November 10, 2026. The effective average tariff rate on Chinese goods entering the United States now sits at approximately 47%, down from a peak of 57%. On March 5th, however, a new legal challenge emerged. According to NPR, a case was filed in federal court in Washington, D.C., accusing the Trump administration of ignoring legislation designed to stop the spread of Chinese propaganda and of instead helping to broker a partial sale of TikTok to businessmen with close ties to Trump. The suit adds a new dimension to the long-running TikTok dispute and raises fresh questions about whether the administration's handling of Chinese-connected platforms serves the national interest or personal political relationships. The case remains in its early stages and has not been adjudicated. From an economic standpoint, China's positioning in the current global moment is complex. Beijing imports significant quantities of oil from Iran and the Gulf region oil that is now being disrupted by the Hormuz closure. China reportedly holds substantial reserves of oil in storage, both on land and in offshore tankers, which provides a buffer. But according to NPR's energy reporting, China's scramble to secure alternative oil supplies could push global prices even higher higher, compounding inflationary pressures on the United States and other oil-importing nations. The Tax Foundation calculates that Trump's tariffs, taken together, constitute the largest U.S. tax increase as a percentage of GDP since 1993, an average tax increase per American household of approximately $1,500 in 2026. China Briefing's 2026 analysis, drawing on the American Chamber of Commerce survey of member companies in China, found that 79% of respondents held a neutral or positive outlook for U.S.-China relations this year, a 30 percentage point improvement from the previous year. Yet analysts caution that the truce is fragile. Trump remains hawkish on China when it comes to trade, and Capitol Hill remains, in the words of China Briefing's analysis, decisively China skeptic. Several anti-China legislative proposals are still moving through Congress. The relationship between the United States and its traditional European allies is operating at what former European Commission President José Manuel Barroso described this January as its lowest moment since NATO was founded in 1949. That statement was made before the Iran War began. The conflict has since added yet another layer of transatlantic friction. To understand the current state of play, we need a brief look back at January. On January 17th, President Trump threatened to impose 10% tariffs on 8 European NATO allies: Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Finland, unless they helped facilitate Washington's acquisition of Greenland, the semi-autonomous Danish territory. Trump said the tariff would rise to 25% by June 1st if no deal was reached. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen described the threats as risking, in her words, a dangerous downward spiral. 8 European nations issued a joint statement saying they stood in full solidarity with Denmark. France called for the activation of the European Union's anti-coercion instrument, a never-before-used trade weapon that could restrict U.S. services exports to Europe. The immediate crisis de-escalated at Davos on January 21st, when Trump pulled back from the tariff threats after meeting NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Trump announced the framework of a future deal on Greenland and Arctic security, though Rutte's office confirmed that no discussion of Greenland's sovereignty took place. Ol Waver, a professor of international relations at the University of Copenhagen, told Al Jazeera that the main process has shifted back to Denmark and Greenland, but that U.S. European closeness and dependency, as in the past, is not coming back. The long-term damage to trust, analysts warn, will outlast any individual agreement. Then came the Iran War, and with it, a fresh transatlantic flashpoint. According to CNBC's live coverage of the war, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez publicly rejected American requests for access to Spanish military bases in support of the Iran campaign. Trump responded by renewing his criticism of Spain, which had also refused to meet NATO's defense spending target of 5% of GDP. The standoff over Spain's military bases illustrates the core tension. European nations are being asked to support a war they did not sanction, in a region where the economic consequences for their own energy security, particularly for LNG imports that pass through the Gulf, are severe. Europe's energy vulnerability is acute. Qatar, which supplies approximately 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas and is a critical energy source for Europe, has seen its LNG facilities attacked and its airspace closed. Qatar Airways suspended all flights as of March 5th. Abu Dhabi's Etihad and Dubai's Emirates also grounded operations. European jet fuel prices surged to multi-year highs this week, according to Axios, and companies that had not pre-hedged their fuel exposure are facing immediate cost spikes. The Peterson Institute's Adam Posen told Marketplace that consumers across both the United States and Europe will likely feel higher shipping costs and elevated insurance premiums within a few months. The broader strategic picture for Europe is this: the continent is caught between a United States that is increasingly transactional and unpredictable in its alliance commitments, a Russian government that Moscow Times analysts describe as actively testing NATO cohesion, and an Iran war that threatens to disrupt energy supplies to the European Union for an indefinite period. Former Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas observed in January that Beijing and Moscow are, in her words, probably celebrating right now as they watch divisions deepen within the transatlantic alliance. That geopolitical reading has not become less accurate in the weeks since. Several critical questions will define the next 72 hours and the next 2 weeks. On the Iran front, will the Strait of Hormuz remain closed? Every additional day of closure adds to the pressure on global oil markets and directly raises the cost of the war for the American consumer. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps stated on Thursday that the coming days would bring, in their words, more intense and widespread attacks, indicating no near-term de-escalation on Tehran's side. President Trump, meanwhile, told reporters he believes he must have a role in determining Iran's next government, a statement that sharply expands the stated ambitions of the conflict beyond the original military justifications. On the domestic front, the key indicator is whether gas prices continue their upward trajectory. If prices approach or exceed $3.50 per gallon by next week, the political pressure on the administration will intensify ahead of the 2026 midterm election cycle. Treasury and Energy Department officials stated they are monitoring oil markets closely and will do everything possible to keep prices stable. Whether that extends to tapping the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which Trump had vowed not to do, remains an unanswered question. On the Russia front, watch for any signal that Moscow decides to move beyond condemnations and take concrete steps in response to the killing of Iran's supreme leader. Russia's substantial economic investment in post-war Iran gives it strong incentives to shape whatever government emerges in Tehran. The expiration of New START and the resumption of military dialogue between Washington and Moscow create a paradoxical environment. Closer military communication, but no treaty framework constraining either side's nuclear posture. On the China front, watch the National People's Congress proceedings closely over the coming week. Beijing's policy direction on trade, technology, and energy purchasing will shape both the global oil market and the fragile U.S. China tariff truce. Any hardening of Chinese rhetoric on Taiwan, on TikTok, or on rare earth materials could trigger a new round of U.S. countermeasures. On the Europe front, watch whether the EU formally activates the anti-coercion instrument and whether the Spain military-based standoff spreads to other NATO members. A key date on the horizon is June 1st, the original deadline Trump set for Greenland tariffs to escalate to 25%. Whether or not a deal on Greenland and Arctic security materializes before then will reveal the true trajectory of the transatlantic relationship. Let us bring this together. In 24 hours, the United States has simultaneously prosecuted an active war in the Middle East, watched its Senate vote to continue that war, seen Congress subpoena its own Attorney General, experienced the biggest single-day gas price spike in years, watched China lower its growth forecast to multi-decade lows, navigated a tense diplomatic standoff with Spain over military bases, and continued to hold a fragile tariff truce with Beijing while both capitals' economies absorb the shocks of a world that is being reordered faster than markets can price. The central economic story behind all of these events is this: the decisions made in Washington's political chambers are landing directly on the wallets of American households. The Iran war is not an abstraction. It is $3.25 per gallon and rising. The China tariffs are not a negotiating footnote. They are an average $1,500 annual tax increase per household. The European alliance tensions are not a diplomatic curiosity. They are rising insurance premiums, canceled flights, and supply chains under stress. Whether any of this reshapes the American political landscape in 2026 depends on how long these pressures persist. History shows that energy shocks are one of the most reliable predictors of electoral mood. The question is whether the current administration has the policy levers and the political will to absorb those shocks before November. For now, every one of the 5 fronts we covered today remains live, unresolved, and consequential. That is your briefing for March 5th, 2026. If you found this analysis useful, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. We are tracking every one of these developments in real time. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Which of these 5 stories do you believe will have the biggest economic impact on the United States over the next 60 days? Let us know. We will see you in the next one.